Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I didn't even want the shift. Doubleheader on a Tuesday? After a 12-hour close on Sunday, the last thing I needed was another crowd of drunk fans and overpriced nachos. But Frank bailed last minute, claimed food poisoning, and Carlo promised to owe me if I covered. I figured fine. One more day in the blue apron, maybe sneak a few innings and catch the skyline view before the smog rolled back in. The sky over Chavez Ravine was unusually clear that morning. Sharp blue, like someone scrubbed the city clean just for the cameras. You don't get many days like that in LA. You learn to pay attention when you do. They put me in section 43, third base side, low-budget seats with decent shade. It wasn't the worst spot, and the regulars were already queuing up before the anthem, crowding in with foam fingers and sunblock. But the vibe was wrong, subtle, like someone left a radio on in the wrong key. Security was heavy, heavier than usual, not just the usual bag checks and half-hearted wand waves. They were really looking, studying faces, whispering into radios. Then I saw it, a guy near the main gate, mid-30s, Dodgers cap, stumbling like he couldn't decide which direction to fall. At first, I thought he was just wasted early, but the security team moved fast, too fast for a drunk. 2 guards peeled off, grabbed him hard, and shoved him into one of those electric service carts without a word. No argument, no warning. The guy didn't even resist, just stared off, eyes glassy, mouth slightly open like he couldn't feel the air. He wasn't drunk, he looked sick, or something worse. I should have turned around right then, should have walked right out past the turnstiles and hopped the metro back downtown. But I didn't. I clocked in like a good employee. I filled warm pretzel trays and checked heat lamps on dogs that looked like they'd been spinning since last week. Routine. That's how they get you. When the world shifts, it never feels like an explosion. It starts with a checklist and plastic gloves. I was halfway through pouring cheese into the warmer when the first loudspeaker announcement cut in, right over the pre-game music. It wasn't the usual, "Please find your seats" type. It wasn't even the Spanish translation that usually follows. Just, "All gates will remain closed until further notice. Thank you for your cooperation." That was it. No explanation, no context, just enough words to feel rehearsed. A dad in a Dodgers jersey leaned over the counter, kid in tow. He asked if it was some kind of drill, said he saw one of the ushers lock the turnstile behind them. I said I didn't know. He laughed nervously and paid for his nachos. That's what people do when they're not sure whether to panic. They default to normal. But the phones told the real story. When I finally got a break around the 3rd inning, I checked mine. Texts, a lot of them, from my sister, from Marco back in Van Nuys. Stuff like, "Are you okay?" and "Dude, what's happening downtown?" One linked to a video that wouldn't load. The signal was dying even with 5 bars. Everyone else around me noticed it too. No cell service, no Wi-Fi. The crowd started shifting in their seats, heads turning toward each other, eyes darting toward the exits. That's when the helicopters started circling. They didn't hover like normal news choppers. They were faster, tighter in formation, black, with no station logos. I caught one low pass over the field. Players stopped mid-pitch. The batter stepped out of the box. You could feel it. The shift. The illusion of the game crumpled like a soda can underfoot. Stadium ops tried to keep it going. A voice came over the system. "Enjoy the game, folks. Please remain seated. We're working on a technical issue." But nobody was listening by then. By the 5th inning, 2 of the vendors from section 50 came running down to our corridor, wide-eyed. They said something about the bleachers. People were fighting. Not just fights. Bites. One guy was screaming that someone had torn a piece of his arm off near the upper deck rail. Another claimed someone tackled a kid and wouldn't get off. Security radios were going nuts. I passed one of the floor supervisors shouting into his headset, asking for more staff to reinforce Gate B. I followed a group of staff through the tunnels under the stands. It was cool down there, fluorescent lit, the walls sweating. We passed equipment cages, old storage rooms, soda crates stacked shoulder high. I saw a man, a cleaner maybe, slumped against the wall near the service tunnel, one hand clutching his stomach, the other trembling on the ground. His mop bucket had tipped, red-tinted water pooling around him. I stepped forward to help. Another worker pulled me back hard and hissed, "Don't touch him, he's sick," one of them. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. Above us, the sound changed. No longer the dull cheer or the crack of bats. It became screaming. The kind of screaming that isn't about a bad call or a home run. Raw, panicked, overlapping. Then, gunshots. Not many, just 3. That made it worse. Everyone down in the service corridor froze. The man with the mop jerked. Not stood, jerked. His limbs spasmed like puppet strings were yanked tight. He made a sound I can still hear, guttural, almost a choking whistle. And then he turned his head and looked at me with eyes so bloodshot it looked like they'd burst. His jaw hung too low, skin sagged. I couldn't move. The man next to me, a mechanic I think, swung a wrench without warning, hit the sick man right in the temple. He collapsed instantly. No one said anything for several seconds. "Go back," someone finally whispered. "Find a door, lock it, we're done here." I ran. Past the concession supply shelves, past the caged-in beer coolers. I made it back to my stand, breathing hard and looking for someone I knew. The stadium above us was chaos. People pouring down staircases, some bleeding, others chasing. And the gates were sealed. We weren't allowed to leave. That's when I realized we weren't just witnessing the start of something. We were already inside it. Someone must have pulled the emergency alarms because red strobes started flashing overhead, but they didn't help. If anything, they made it worse. Everything flickered like a strobe light nightmare. I could see flashes of people running, others dragging behind. I saw a man with half his shirt missing limp toward a gate guard, only to get tackled by a woman. At least I thought she was a woman. Her hands were bloody. She bit through the guard's neck like paper. I slammed the shutter down on the concession stand window and crawled under the counter. Dumb instinct. Like that thin metal frame would stop anything. I stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, maybe an hour. Time didn't make sense anymore. I could hear footsteps running past. I heard someone pounding on the metal, begging to be let in. Then silence. Then the dragging sound. When I crawled out, the corridor was dim. The stadium lighting was flickering now, power failing in sections. I grabbed one of the mop handles from the back and held it like a spear. I made my way down the service path, trying not to think. Just move. Just go. In one of the tunnels, I ran into a small group of other workers, 4 of them. One of the women was bleeding from her hand. They were barricading a heavy door with folding tables and chairs. They looked at me like I was a threat. I raised my hands and said I was unarmed. The woman with the cut glared at me. "Were you bitten?" she asked. Sharp, cold. "No," I said. "I saw someone who was, but I didn't touch him." A man behind her said, "Let him in. He's got a pulse and full words. That's more than half the stadium." I joined them. We jammed more chairs into the doorframe. It wasn't going to hold if something big pushed, but it bought us time. That's all this is now. Time. We sat in a maintenance room lit by battery lanterns. The woman who was bleeding, her name was Darla, wrapped her hand tight. Said she cut it on the shutter while trying to close the food window. No one asked again if it might have been from something else, but everyone watched her. Closely. A younger guy, Jesse, said he saw the LAPD outside the gates, just standing. Not helping, not shooting, just waiting, like they were ordered not to interfere. Another guy, Carl, said he heard from someone in security that some of the infected were staff. He said one of the club-level bartenders had collapsed mid-shift and got up wrong, then took a bite out of a guest's shoulder. We didn't say anything after that. Not for a while. The 5 of us just sat there in that stale maintenance room behind a barricade of folding chairs and half-cracked plastic bins, staring at the metal door as if it might burst open at any second. The lights flickered overhead in that uneven rhythm, powered by whatever emergency backup system was still holding on. and the battery lantern Jessie had set up on a milk crate between us cast long shadows across the concrete walls. It smelled like bleach, old popcorn oil, and sweat. No one coughed. No one even shifted in place unless they had to. We all watched Darla's hand. She'd wrapped it up tight with napkins, duct tape, and a pair of clean socks from the lost and found drawer. She insisted it wasn't a bite, just a cut from the shutter bar, but you could feel the room tightening every time she moved. She kept flexing her fingers like she needed to prove something, and maybe she did. No one accused her, but no one asked her to help with the door again either. After a while, Carl stood and started moving crates away from the far corner. It was a dumb move, noisy, but he said he remembered a floor drain behind them, and if we were going to stay here a while, we needed somewhere to go to the bathroom. He wasn't wrong. It made me think of things I didn't want to think about yet. What happens in 3 days? In a week? What if the power finally dies and the air stops moving? What if whatever's outside gets in? Jessie fiddled with the radio again, still mostly static, but now and then we caught pieces of things. Someone on Channel 9 mentioned overrun zones near Union Station. There was a garbled alert in Spanish warning about a biological threat in the greater Los Angeles basin. Another voice, probably National Guard, asked for confirmation of rooftop flares at a commercial district but was cut off before anyone replied. It didn't make sense. Half the reports sounded like old tape loops or out-of-order sequences. Either the networks were failing, or no one was coordinating anymore. The silence between the crackles was worse than the noise. I checked my phone again. No bars, no Wi-Fi. Just the last text frozen on my screen. My sister asking if I was safe. Marco saying not to go home, that Van Nuys was already gone. That word hit harder than I expected. Gone. What does that even mean? Streets don't disappear. Apartments don't just vanish. But maybe they do. Maybe whatever was happening wasn't about what you could see anymore, but about what you'd never see again. Around what felt like early evening, though it was hard to tell without daylight, someone pounded on the door. Hard. 3 hits, evenly spaced, not like running or fleeing, deliberate, like knocking. We froze. Carl and Jessie both stood at the same time. Carl held that wrench again. Jessie held a short metal pipe he'd found under the sink. I backed up. Darla stood too, against the far wall, cradling her hand. The knocking came again, but no words followed, no cries for help. Just that awful knock, slow and even. After the 3rd set, it stopped. Jessie looked through the vent slats in the upper door panel, but it was too dark on the other side. No shadows moving, he said. Then don't open it, I told him. We waited 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. Carl moved one of the chairs just slightly, just enough to give the door a test tug in case we had to run later. He didn't open it. We agreed, unspoken but clear, that we weren't checking again. If someone wanted in, they could prove they were alive. Screaming, talking, kicking. Something. But polite knocking? That was worse. At some point, the noise outside changed again. A sound like distant thunder started rolling through the corridors above us. Heavy impacts, echoing through metal. Not the crowd. Not anymore. This was something else. One after another, like distant dumpsters being overturned. Carl said it sounded like crowd-control trucks or riot vehicles, but those don't usually drive inside stadiums. We moved to the back of the room, where a utility ladder led up to a second-level hatch. Darla climbed it first, despite everyone's silent tension, and looked through the access slit above. She said she saw part of the hallway on the club level, lights still on, no movement, just spilled trash, a line of popcorn bags, and one shoe. Just one. I volunteered to go up with her. She looked tired, and even if no one admitted it, I think we all wanted her watched. The others stayed behind. I carried the mop handle I'd taken earlier, held tight across my chest, and stepped slowly as we emerged into the hall. It looked like a ghost town up there. The lights hummed overhead in a low, flickering pulse. The corridor that usually bustled with VIPs and stadium hosts during games was silent. The drink station was overturned. Bottles of soda lay broken across the floor, sugar glued to the tile. Darla pointed toward the guest suites. We moved slowly, peering through the glass doors as we passed. Some had blood smeared on the handles. Others were intact, just abandoned. Coats on chairs, open bags, still lit screens showing the paused game from earlier like some ridiculous normality had just hit pause. In one of the suites, we saw movement. Not a lot, just a shift of something in the far end of the room, too fast to be a breeze, too slow to be urgent. Darla held up her good hand, motioned me to stop. We watched through the glass. Nothing moved again. For 20, maybe 30 seconds, it was still. Then, something rolled into view. Just a cup, empty, but someone, or something, had kicked it. We backed away without a word, didn't look back. Whatever was in there didn't follow. As we returned to the maintenance hatch, we both heard something from the stadium bowl. Distant moaning. Not the kind you'd hear from a crowd after a bad call. Lower, deeper, broken. And it wasn't one voice. It was 100, maybe more, layered over each other. Moaning, dragging, scraping, and every few seconds, wet impacts. Flesh on concrete. Not fast, but constant. Something was happening in the seating sections. Back inside, Jesse had unrolled a full map of the stadium complex. He'd worked concessions here for 6 seasons and knew the layout. He pointed to the underground storage access at the far end of the south tunnel, a route usually reserved for deliveries and late-game cleanup. If we could make it there, we might find a way up to the press box level and see what was going on in the field. But more than that, there was a utility panel there, an old one, wired directly into the speaker system. If it still had backup juice, we could try broadcasting a signal or a warning. Anything. The next few hours blurred. We took turns sleeping in shifts, but no one really slept. I kept my back to the wall and my eyes on the door. At some point, someone screamed out in the stadium bowl again. We couldn't tell if it was joy or terror. It ended fast. When we moved, we did it quietly. Carl led with his wrench. I followed with my mop handle. Darla came last. One hand wrapped, the other clutching a broken piece of stadium chair she'd twisted into a point. Jesse watched the rear. We moved through the tunnels like shadows, ducking around corners, listening for footsteps that didn't belong to us. Once, in the tunnel near the batting cages, we saw a cluster of bodies. Not lying down, standing, just standing. 10 or more, all in uniforms, staff, vendors. One wore the same color polo I had on. They were motionless, swaying, clustered around a vending machine like flies to light. One of them sniffed the air suddenly. We dropped flat against the wall, dead silent. A coin fell from the machine. It hit the ground with a clang. They twitched. One turned. Its head was tilted too far. Neck muscles didn't work that way, but its nose lifted and it sniffed again. We backed away the long route. Didn't breathe. Didn't speak until we were 2 turns and 3 doorways away. Near the broadcast corridor, the ceiling had partially collapsed. A busted pipe was spraying something cold and oily across the floor. Jesse said it was part of the fire suppression system. Some mix of foam and fluid, but it was ankle deep and coated with floating trash. We waded through it anyway. Didn't have a choice. Every step made noise. The utility room was dark, but the panel still had a faint green glow. It worked. Jesse started fumbling with the switches, trying to override the lock network. Carl held the door. Darla sat with her back to the panel, staring at nothing. Her wrapped hand was trembling. She tried to hide it. "I need to tell you something," she finally said. Carl didn't look. Jesse kept tapping the board. I was the only one who met her eyes. "I'm not bitten," she said, "but I did get scratched. Not deep, just the arm. One of those things tried to grab me earlier before I found you." Jesse stopped. Carl looked up. "But it's not getting worse," she added quickly. "It's not swelling. I can still feel everything. I needed to say it. In case I don't make it, I didn't lie to anyone." The room went quiet again. Quieter than before. She wasn't asking for trust. She was preparing us. That mattered. Then the speaker panel clicked. One light turned red. Jesse hit the intercom toggle and pulled the mic close. "This is Dodger Stadium. If anyone can hear this, we're inside. We're not infected. We have 4 survivors, requesting extraction or shelter or contact. Anyone. Jesse repeated the message 3 times, slow and clear. He leaned into the microphone with the kind of desperation people hide behind calm tones, like if he sounded too afraid, the signal would carry less weight. The panel blinked slowly, red to green, like it was thinking. But the room stayed silent. Then a crackle, just a whisper of static, the kind that makes you lean in, strain to hear something that might not be there. Jesse waited. We all did, but it never formed words, just a fading hiss, like something had tried to speak and lost power halfway through. Then nothing. Carl swore under his breath and stepped away from the door. He'd been watching the hallway for the past 10 minutes with a tension in his stance I hadn't seen before. His knuckles were white on the wrench. Jesse tapped the panel again, but the power dropped. The light blinked twice, then went dark. No pop, no spark. Just gone. Maybe the backup batteries finally gave out. Maybe the rest of the stadium finally bled dry. Either way, the only working line we had left to the outside had vanished, and no one was coming to tell us what to do next. We sat in that utility room without speaking for longer than we should have. No one wanted to say it, but I think all of us felt the weight of that silence settle in. 4 people, trapped in one of the largest stadiums in the country. Doors sealed, signals dead, food running out, water trickling from a single leaky pipe in the janitor's closet. And outside, who knew how many of those things were wandering the halls now, drawn by noise or scent or whatever drove them. I kept thinking about that cluster we'd seen near the vending machine, all swaying, waiting like they'd forgotten how to move unless something told them to. Jesse finally stood, grabbing the radio again and adjusting the dial. Nothing. Static. We were on our own, but something about being in motion helped. He said he'd rather move than sit and wait to rot. That hit Carl wrong. He said sitting tight was the only reason we were still breathing, that the ones running were probably the ones screaming now. They went back and forth until Darla coughed and shut them both up. She looked worse. Not in the face. Her eyes were clear, but her breathing was shallow, and her skin had gone damp and pale. The scratch, she said, was starting to burn. We unwrapped it and saw the bruising had spread in streaks. Not black, not festering, just discolored veins threading away from the gash like roots beneath the skin. Carl didn't say it, but I saw the way his eyes moved, counting how close he was to the wrench. Jesse stepped out of the room first. He said if the power was dead, we'd better start finding a way out, now, not tomorrow, not next week. Darla agreed. She couldn't keep up if we waited much longer. Whatever was happening to her wasn't slowing down. There was one way we hadn't checked yet, the tunnel beneath the outfield, a delivery corridor used for concert stages and heavy equipment. Jesse had passed it once on a late shift a few years back and said it led to a staging area near the outer perimeter, maybe even to the security checkpoint built into the hill behind Lot G. If we could reach that far, we might find an exit no one thought to seal, or at least one that wasn't overrun. The plan was loose, risky, but it was something. We moved with care, retracing our steps through the half-flooded broadcast corridor and back down toward the underground network. It was darker now, only emergency beacons pulsing dim blue along the walls, like old plane lights in a blackout. The air was cold and wet, and everything echoed louder than it should. Even our breathing bounced back at us like whispers from something watching. Twice we had to stop and duck into side rooms. Once it was because of a body. At least, we thought it was a body. It lay curled near the edge of a stairwell, unmoving, dressed in a team jacket soaked dark around the sleeves. As we passed, its fingers twitched, but no breath, no groan. We didn't stop to find out more. The second time, we heard them again. Those voices. Not words. Just that strange chorus of groans, some low, some sharp, all dragging together like wind moving through empty seats. And beneath it, something heavier. Movement. Not sprinting or stomping, but deliberate and slow. Measured, like patrols. Whatever intelligence they lacked in thought, they made up for in numbers and coordination. That much was becoming clear. These weren't just feral attackers. They moved together, clustered, waited. The tunnel to the outfield began with a rusted gate half opened. Jessie ducked under first, Carl next. I helped Darla through last. She winced with every movement, but she didn't slow us down. Not once. She was sweating now, her eyes sunken a little, but still lucid, still herself. We descended deeper, past the service level. The air changed again, heavier, still. The hum of electricity was gone, just the faint drip of old runoff and the creak of beams settling. It felt like we were walking into something no one had touched in years, not hours. Then the smell hit. Not rot, at least, not entirely. It was chemical, sour and sharp, like antifreeze or burnt plastic. We rounded a corner and found the source. A pile of equipment crates, some cracked open, scattered across the tunnel floor, surrounded by blackened streaks and piles of what looked like scorched fabric. But some of it wasn't fabric. Some of it had faces, charred outlines, bone fragments melted into rubber soles. Jessie bent close to one crate and found a tag half-burned. Military-grade disinfectant, the kind used for deep decontamination. Not sold on shelves, not made for public use. Whatever this area had been, it wasn't just a tunnel. Someone had tried to clean it, or erase it. That meant they knew, before we did, maybe before anyone in the stands even had a clue. As we crept forward, we heard a sound that froze all of us in place. Footsteps, not dragging, not clumsy, boots, real ones, moving fast, steady, controlled. Carl motioned us back behind one of the storage racks, and we crouched low. A squad moved through the tunnel, 4 people in dark uniforms, helmets, full-face respirators, no insignia, no lights on their weapons. They moved like they'd been here before, like they were retracing familiar ground, and they weren't looking for survivors. They stopped near the burn zone. One of them radioed something. The other lifted a small device, scanner maybe, and swept it over the area. Then they turned back the way they came. No hesitation, no rescue call. Just in, scan, out. Jessie whispered that we couldn't follow them. Too risky. They were a cleanup crew, not extraction. Whatever protocols they followed didn't include us. We waited until their steps disappeared completely, then kept moving in the opposite direction. The tunnel narrowed into a choke point, an old loading bay with a sloped incline leading to a rusted door sealed with a steel bar. Jessie tried the latch. It groaned but held. Carl put his weight into it. I helped. Darla stood back, eyes unfocused, leaning against the wall like she was listening for something we couldn't hear. When the door finally gave way, it opened into a vast underground garage, one I hadn't known existed. Stacks of unused golf carts, maintenance trucks, plastic bins filled with zip ties and cable reels. On the far end, a freight elevator shaft with the doors pried open and the cage halfway up, stuck between levels. The place had that stillness, the kind that warns you to tread lightly or not at all. We moved carefully through the space, checking for signs of movement. Nothing at first. Then a scraping noise from one of the far bays. Soft, repeated, metal on metal. Carl raised his wrench. Jessie froze. I stepped toward the row of carts to peer around the crates. It was a child, a girl, maybe 10. She wore a torn sweatshirt and clutched a baseball glove in one hand. Her other hand dragged a chain tied around her ankle, half wrapped in duct tape. Her mouth was sewn shut. I stepped back fast. She didn't lunge, didn't groan, just stood there, breathing hard through her nose, eyes wide, darting between us. I couldn't speak, couldn't even form the question. Who would do that to a kid? Darla stepped closer, inching across the cracked garage floor, her wrapped hand at her side and the other palm out in front of her. She wasn't pretending to be fearless. Her legs wobbled slightly with every step, but she wasn't hesitating either. The girl's eyes were locked on her, big and rimmed with red, not crying, but dry and wide. Her breathing was loud in the stillness, nose pulling sharp, irregular bursts of air, and that chain she dragged behind her was heavier than it looked. Every little twitch sent a metallic scrape echoing through the concrete room like a signal flare. Darla didn't flinch. She crouched down just close enough that her voice wouldn't carry past the two of them, and spoke again, soft and slow. "We're trying to leave," she said. "We don't want to hurt you. Do you understand me?" The girl blinked twice. She didn't nod, Didn't speak. Couldn't, with the thick cross-stitched line drawn across her lips like something out of a nightmare. But she gave the tiniest lean forward, like she was listening now. Engaged. I stepped closer too, hands low, trying not to loom. Jesse and Carl were further back, behind one of the supply carts, watching the open ceiling vents and that freight elevator shaft. Whatever was up there might have seen light, or movement, or worse, heard us. Darla gestured slowly toward the girl's ankle. Can we take that off? Another blink. This time, a slight shiver through the girl's arms. She backed away one step, enough to make the chain rattle again. We won't leave you like this, Darla said. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a promise. I reached into my pack for the small pry tool I'd pocketed earlier, something I'd grabbed from a broken locker door back near the lower concourse. I handed it to Carl without speaking. His hands were steadier than mine. Darla motioned for him to come slowly, and together she and Carl knelt beside the girl while Jesse kept lookout. I stayed near the access door we'd come through, trying to listen through the dense stillness for any sign of approaching boots or dragging limbs. The chain was wound tight, not just around her ankle, but through a loop that had been bolted to the floor with industrial screws. Probably a tie-down point for equipment. Someone had repurposed it. The chain wasn't welded, but the lock was military-grade, thick steel with pitted corrosion where blood, or something darker, had dried in streaks. The girl winced when Carl started levering the edge, but she didn't cry out, didn't even grunt, just shook once, then squeezed Darla's sleeve with one trembling hand. Whatever she'd been through, it had taught her this. Make no sound. It took 2 full minutes of quiet, careful prying to snap the lock shackle. When it finally gave, it didn't explode with a loud crack, just a small metallic pop, like a can opening in a silent room. The girl staggered slightly, rubbed her ankle, then glanced at Darla. For a second, I saw something there. Not quite trust, not yet, but recognition. She didn't bolt. That alone felt like a victory. We moved together, quickly but without running, deeper into the garage. The girl followed without needing to be pulled. She moved barefoot, steps soft, eyes scanning the ceiling, as if she knew better than we did what lived up there. I kept waiting for her to try and speak, forgetting that she couldn't. The threads across her mouth were crude but deliberate. Whoever did that wanted to keep her absolutely silent. Whether to stop her from screaming or calling out, we didn't know. And we weren't going to ask. Not yet. Jesse led us around the elevator shaft and into a side maintenance corridor, one that sloped upward at a strange angle, not part of the official blueprints. He'd only ever seen it once before, during a stadium expansion tour he took with a now missing operations manager. The door at the end led to the upper utility platforms behind the stadium's north face, near the lighting rig access. If it hadn't been locked or crushed, it might take us all the way outside. But something was wrong with the air. As we crept upward, the atmosphere thickened, like walking through invisible wool. It clung to the skin, not humid, not warm, just wrong. The kind of wrong that makes animals leave an area before a quake. Jesse noticed it too. His neck kept craning, eyes darting toward the exposed piping above us. The girl kept close to Darla now, small fingers gripping the hem of her shirt. Carl started muttering something about how the light was off, pointing to the red status panels along the corridor that should have blinked, all dark. And then, a sound we hadn't heard before. Not groaning, not footsteps. A wet clicking, like knuckles cracking in rhythm, but amplified, unnatural. It echoed once from the vent ahead of us, then again from behind. Carl froze mid-step. Jesse raised his hand, clenched fist. Stop. I gripped my mop handle so tight it squeaked in my gloves. The girl didn't scream, but she crouched low behind Darla and pressed her palms over her ears. Darla leaned back against the wall. Her breathing was shallow now. She looked pale, sweat soaked through her collar. She said nothing, just gave me a tight nod, her teeth clenched. I didn't have to ask. She knew. Whatever was coming, whatever that clicking belonged to, it wasn't the same as the others. And if it was tracking us, it wasn't doing it blind. We kept moving, no longer caring if our boots scuffed. Silence didn't buy us anything if we weren't fast. The corridor leveled out into a rust-streaked catwalk that overlooked the stadium's north end, a mesh-covered tunnel that hadn't been used since the 90s. Most of the lights were dead, and sections of the railing had collapsed inward. Through a side panel, I could see the night sky. Barely. It was choked with smoke. Something across the valley was burning, casting orange glows across the skyline in slow, pulsing waves. It might have been Griffith Park, maybe Highland. No sirens, no choppers, just smoke and silence. The clicking returned, louder now, below us. I looked down through the metal grate floor and caught the shape of something wrong. Too tall, moving too smoothly, limbs jointed in the wrong places, not running, sliding, like muscle guided by a memory instead of a mind. Its head tilted at strange angles, listening, sniffing. Its spine twitched like a whip every few seconds, and it wasn't alone. Two others trailed behind it. Not the same. Smaller, twitchier. One of them slammed into a support beam and then recoiled like it hadn't noticed. They didn't walk. They ticked, like clocks. Constant, off time, mechanical and wet. We ran. No more stealth, no more careful steps. Jessie led, Carl second. Darla gritted her teeth and moved as fast as her legs would allow. I scooped up the girl, light as a sack of bones, and carried her under one arm. She didn't struggle. She wrapped her arms around my neck and buried her face. Not crying, just holding on. The end of the catwalk came faster than we expected. A solid steel hatch. Jessie threw his shoulder into it. Locked. Carl checked the keypad. Dead. No juice. Darla pulled something from her coat. A battery. Small. External. Something she'd scavenged and never told us about. She plugged it into the bypass slot and the keypad buzzed once. Just enough to flicker. Jessie slammed the enter key again. Click. The hatch swung open and we tumbled into a narrow stairwell, all of us crashing down the steps in frantic, overlapping footfalls. Behind us, metal screamed. The ticking had reached the catwalk. One of them was climbing. We reached the base of the stairwell, a gate, chain-locked from the outside. Jessie didn't hesitate. He took the pipe from his pack and drove it into the latch. Twice. 3 times. It snapped, the metal ring falling away like it had never mattered at all. We pushed through into open air. The parking lot was empty, not abandoned, emptied. Vehicles were scorched. One of the stadium buses lay half submerged in a crater near the lot's east wall. The air reeked of fuel and scorched plastic. Whatever had happened here wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate, like a sweep had come through with fire and explosives, cleaning up what hadn't escaped. The girl still clung to me, her thin arms tight around my neck as we crossed the warped asphalt. I could feel her ribs pressing into my chest with every breath she took. Short and shallow, not panicked, but like she was conserving what little energy she had left. Her eyes scanned the horizon behind me, never forward. She wasn't watching where we were going. She was watching where we'd been, and that scared me more than anything. Jessie and Carl were already 10 yards ahead, moving between twisted skeletons of cars, some blackened, some overturned. Others picked apart like insects had chewed through the metal. Darla followed behind them, limping but upright, leaning on a broken golf club she'd taken from one of the carts in the lower garage. Her scratch hadn't gotten better. The veins around it looked darker now, angrier. Her skin had gone pale as driftwood, but she didn't say a word. Not about that. Not about anything. Just kept walking like she knew the only thing worse than dying in the stadium was dying just outside of it. The north parking lot, once massive and neatly painted with rows and section letters, now looked like a battlefield someone had tried to erase. Craters pocked the lanes where the tarmac had buckled. The remains of portable toilets, ticket trailers, and even a few patrol vehicles were strewn across the area like scattered game pieces. The patrol cars in particular made my stomach turn. They'd been emptied with precision, doors open, windows shot out. One of them had scorch marks from what looked like thermite or some kind of directed burn. Something military, not random, not looter work. Jessie pointed to the bumper of one, a small, almost unnoticeable triangle etched in black near the trunk. No department markings, no license plate. Whoever had been through here didn't want credit. They wanted silence. We moved in a staggered line, skirting between car frames, every eye on the dark perimeter fence beyond the lots. We were at the back of the stadium's north face now, on the slope where the parking structures start to give way to the outer roadways and the winding hillside that leads to Elysian Park. There should have been a guard station here, a small checkpoint with an arm barrier and a radio shack. But it was gone. Completely gone. Not even rubble. Just the blackened square of melted cement where it used to stand, and a single half-melted folding chair lying on its side. The silence was complete out here, not even broken by insects. The only sound was the crunch of debris under our feet and the distant whine of sirens from somewhere deep in the valley. Maybe toward Echo Park, maybe Silver Lake. It was impossible to tell anymore where the threat was and where it wasn't. Nothing sounded like rescue. We ducked into what was left of a landscaping trench near the fence, dropping low so our silhouettes wouldn't be obvious. Carl kept sweeping the horizon with a pair of compact binoculars he'd taken from one of the media lockers. Every few minutes, he'd mutter something under his breath. Code from the old world. Clear left, window at 2, possible motion across the floodlights. Useless now, but it helped keep us grounded. Jesse finally found a break in the fence, not cut, peeled, like something large and fast had gone straight through it without slowing down. The metal had curled backward in long, torn loops, and the concrete anchoring the post was cracked from the base. No signs of fire, no obvious blast. Just force. Pure, unyielding force. Darla knelt beside the gap and ran her fingers over one of the twisted beams. The tips of her fingers came away black, but not from soot, from something thicker, more like dried resin or coagulated oil. The girl didn't approach. She stood frozen behind me, her eyes locked on the fence like it was still moving. "We go," Jesse said. "Now. This hole doesn't stay ours forever." We moved through single file. Carl first, then Jesse, then me and the girl, Darla last. The slope on the other side dipped into the drainage ditch that skirted the outer road. From there, it was a 30-foot hike up to the lower tree line of Elysian Park. A mess of dry brush, power boxes, and switchback roads that hadn't seen maintenance in weeks. From there, we could, in theory, descend into the neighborhoods west of the stadium. Frogtown, Atwater. If the bridges weren't blocked, we might even reach the riverbed and get south. But when we cleared the ditch and got our first view of the hills beyond, all plans stopped. The trees were gone, or rather, they were there, but burned black. A wide patch of the park had been torched in controlled lines, like a wildfire that had obeyed someone's directions. Patches of ash still glowed in dull orange lines beneath the char, and dotting the slope, like mannequins abandoned mid-motion, were figures. Not soldiers, not civilians. Infected. But they weren't moving. They stood in long, unnatural rows, arms at sides, eyes open, swaying slightly like tall grass in windless air. They weren't reacting to us. Not yet. But there were dozens, maybe more. No movement. No growling, no direction, just standing, listening. Carl dropped to one knee, breath held. "We're not across yet. They don't see us." "How are they standing like that?" I whispered. "That's not—" "They're waiting," Darla said. Her voice was hoarse now, barely audible. "That's what they do now. Wait for the signal." Jesse looked at her, something in his face changing. "What signal?" She didn't answer. She just looked toward the hills. Her lips were trembling, and the sweat down her neck looked like it had taken on a faint grey tint. Jesse reached into his bag, pulled out the last flare he had, one of the marine-grade ones from the stadium emergency pack. "We need a distraction," he said. "Something to pull them downhill. We circle wide through the brush, go up and around, then drop into the street level behind the park." Carl grabbed his arm. "Or we stay put and wait until dark." Jesse looked at the sky, barely orange now, with smoke streaking across the stars. "That is dark. You want to run blind?" No one moved, not until the girl tapped my shoulder and pointed toward the far right of the slope. A side path, almost invisible, half covered by fallen scrub and ash, but definitely there. She looked at me, then at the line of infected, then back at me. The message was clear. They don't patrol that way. We didn't argue. We followed her. The path was tight, single file, shielded from above by brush that hadn't burned completely. We had to move slowly, crouched low. Every step kicked up layers of dust and ash, and more than once I had to stop and let the girl catch her breath. She never made a sound, not even when her feet slipped or a thorn dragged across her arm. She was practiced. Whoever had taken her voice hadn't taken her instincts. Behind us, something in the valley shifted. Not a noise, a pressure, like when a train passes too close or a jet dips low. We all stopped, listened, and then it came. A tone, not high-pitched, not loud, just there, vibrating, subaudible, like it passed through you instead of around you. The girl collapsed. She clutched her ears and curled into a ball. Darla dropped to one knee, holding her chest. Jesse cursed and grabbed his temples like something was stabbing from the inside. Then the sound stopped. Not faded, stopped, cut off like a switch had been thrown. And in the distance, the rows of infected turned. Together, in perfect unison. No one spoke. We just moved, fast. The hill dropped into a back road that used to feed into a bike path near the 110 freeway. It was torn now, fractured by roots and fire and time, but open. And for the first time since we left the stadium, we saw real buildings ahead. Houses, fence lines, the shattered outline of a diner. We ran the last 2 blocks, straight through broken fences, over scattered trash, past silent buildings with dark windows. Then Jesse fell. Not from exhaustion, not from tripping. Something had grabbed his leg from a drainage pipe. I turned just in time to see it. A twisted face, eyeless, with its mouth torn wide and a metal ring embedded in its jaw, like someone had tried to control it before it broke free. Its arm was too long, its fingers bent backwards. Jesse kicked hard, and Carl was on it in seconds, driving the pipe into its face over and over until it stopped twitching. Not bleeding, just stopping. We dragged Jesse away, but his pant leg was torn, blood smeared down his shin. He looked at it, didn't say anything, just stood, breathing hard, and kept walking. No one asked if it was a bite. No one needed to. We'd all made it out of the stadium, through the fences, past the burn lines, across the rows of waiting death. But the infection had still found us. Maybe it had never left. Maybe it was always just a few steps behind. We found shelter in the diner. The glass had been blown out, but the back room still had walls, a sink, and 2 locking doors. No one was inside, just dust and silence. The kind of silence that only comes after something violent has already passed through. A brittle hush, not safe or peaceful, just left over. The kind that wraps around your shoulders like a warning and never really lifts. The girl was asleep within minutes, curled into herself in the back corner of the pantry, her tiny frame wedged between a stack of unopened paper cup boxes and a crate of faded ketchup packets. We didn't wake her. Jesse gave her the last slice of protein bar from his pack before she nodded off, and she ate it with small, slow bites like she didn't expect there to be more. There wasn't. Carl took the first watch without being asked. He stationed himself in the front dining room, behind the old chipped counter where the till used to be, one eye on the broken glass entrance and the other on the quiet street outside. He didn't look tired, just wired, still holding the pipe he'd used to finish the thing that grabbed Jesse. His knuckles had dried blood crusted across them, black, flaking, sharp around the fingernails. He didn't seem to notice. Darla eased herself down against the wall next to the walk-in fridge and unwrapped her arm again. The veins around the scratch had darkened. Not red, not black, more like a dull blue spreading beneath the skin like ink dropped in water. It pulsed in rhythm now, a faint twitch visible just under the surface. She didn't hide it, didn't even flinch when I looked. She just leaned her head back against the tile and closed her eyes. "I'm still here," she whispered, "still thinking, still me, for now." Jesse didn't answer. He was sitting on one of the overturned bar stools by the sink, leg propped up, examining the torn flesh on his shin. The bleeding had stopped, but the skin around the tear was puffy and already turning a color that didn't belong to anything alive. He kept pressing the edge of the cut with a clean napkin, watching it like he was expecting something. Maybe movement, maybe nothing. Maybe he didn't know what to expect at all. None of us did. I stayed in the middle of the room, back to the wall, where I could see both doors and hear the girl breathing. Her rhythm was slow and even, almost unnaturally still. I kept counting her breaths over and over, like if I could just keep tally, I'd know if something went wrong before it got bad. Carl came back in after a while, nodded once, and took a seat by the opposite wall. He didn't say anything for a long time. The sky outside was starting to brighten. Not sunrise, just a sickly glow from the west, the color of firelight against clouds. Somewhere behind the hills, Louisiana was still burning. "They did this on purpose," Carl finally said. "The lockdown, the silence, all of it." No one asked who they were, not anymore. That word had become a placeholder for something larger, unspoken. Government, military, contractors. Whoever had arrived before the rest of us even knew there was something to hide. Whoever had used Dodger Stadium as a trap, not a shelter. "I saw something back in the corridor," he continued. "When we were near the catwalk, a crate, had the logo of a logistics firm I worked for back in Fresno, years ago. Defense shipping. They don't move stadium food. They move tech, bio-containment units, field barriers, specialized suppression gear. Whatever was there before us, it wasn't for crowds or panic." "You think this was ground zero?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I think it was a backup plan." Darla opened her eyes again. "That sound we heard, the vibration, it wasn't for us. It was for them. A command." Jesse looked up from his leg. "Like a signal? Like a leash," she said. We sat with that idea for a while. The notion that the infected weren't just wandering, but waiting. That something or someone still had a hold on them. That those moments of stillness weren't random. That maybe the outbreak had been controlled longer than we'd known, and we were never meant to make it this far. Later, we found a box of powdered coffee in the back of a cabinet and managed to mix it with water warmed over a cracked sterno flame. It tasted like metal and bitterness, but it was hot, and it gave us something to do with our hands. We passed the mug around in silence, each taking a few sips before handing it off. Around midday, if time meant anything at all anymore, we decided to move again. The flare incident the night before, the rows of waiting infected, the unnatural quiet of the neighborhood. We couldn't stay here long. The diner felt too exposed, too easy to corner. Carl scouted the back alley and found a side gate leading into a fenced loading area behind a strip of old storefronts. The girl was awake now, standing beside the sink, watching us silently. She hadn't tried to communicate, but when we showed her the path, she nodded once. We moved slow, past the ruined pharmacy with its windows shattered and shelves emptied, past the dry cleaners with half-pressed jackets still dangling on motorized racks. Every street corner told its own story. Cars stalled mid-turn, bicycles abandoned mid-pedal, shopping carts overturned like someone had sprinted the moment something screamed. Jesse spotted a map in the broken window of a bus shelter, a real one, printed and weather-faded. He traced a route with his finger from where we were now to a freeway overpass that might lead down toward the riverbed. The idea was to find a bridge, any bridge, cross the 5, and make our way southeast toward the industrial corridor. He'd heard rumors that the National Guard had staged some kind of containment wall near the rail yards weeks ago. Whether it was still there was a coin toss, but it was something. We reached the edge of the viaduct around late afternoon. The sun had broken through in slices, orange and hollow, setting the cracked asphalt in long gold shadows. From the bridge, we could see the Los Angeles River, dry as always, littered with cars, trash, and shapes that didn't move. I scanned the rooftops to the west. Nothing. The skyline had gone soft around the edges, faded by distance and smoke, like a memory more than a city. Then the girl stopped walking. She stood still, hand out, pointing toward a long stretch of empty road leading down to the water. At first, I didn't see it. Then I did. A barricade, steel mesh, heavy, reinforced with sandbags, and behind it, movement. Not jerky or twitching. Human, People in clean uniforms, helmets, rifles slung tight across their backs. They weren't infected. They weren't running. They were posted. Still, a checkpoint. Jesse swore under his breath and dropped to his knees. We made it. Carl stayed standing, watching them. They haven't seen us. Darla staggered, her legs nearly folding. I caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was hot now, burning through her shirt. But she was conscious, still lucid. "We have to try," she whispered. "If they're real, we have to." We moved forward slowly, hands raised. No weapons, no sudden moves. The girl clung to me again, this time higher on my back, her arms wrapped around my neck like roots. Carl kept one hand raised and the other gripping Jesse by the shoulder in case his leg gave out. When we were within 100 yards, someone called out from the barricade. A megaphone, rough voice, clipped and cold. "Stop right there. Do not approach. Hands where we can see them." We did. "We have a wounded," I called back. "Two, possibly infected but not turned. Not violent. Please." There was silence. Then more voices. Radios. Then the same megaphone again. "One by one. Approach slowly. We will assess." Jesse went first, limping, arms raised. They scanned him from 20 feet. Then Carl. Then me, with the girl. When it was Darla's turn, she didn't move. She looked at me. Just looked. Then she took one step back. "I won't make it," she said, "and they won't let me in." "You don't know that," I said. "I do," she replied, and I believed her. She smiled, weak but real, and handed me the small notebook she'd been keeping tucked in her coat. "Tell someone what happened in the stadium," she whispered. "Tell them we didn't go quiet." Then she turned, walked back the way we came, not fast, not afraid, just gone. At the barricade, a figure in full tactical gear checked my pulse, my eyes, asked the girl's name. I didn't have one to give. He didn't push. We were brought through a decontamination tent that smelled of bleach and fuel, then past a row of trailers into a fenced camp surrounded by more sandbags, more guns. Jesse collapsed the moment we crossed inside. Carl didn't speak, just stared at the gate like he couldn't believe it closed behind him. Inside, the survivors didn't talk much. They gave us water, blankets, took our names, if we had them, asked us what we'd seen, what we knew, what we believed. I told them what I could, about the stadium, the girl with no voice, the signal we heard, the infected that waited, and Darla, always Darla. They listened, took notes. Then they told me something I still haven't forgotten. "You weren't the first group out of Dodger," one of the officers said, "but you're the first that didn't come back wrong." I didn't ask what wrong meant. I already knew. That was 6 days ago. The girl still hasn't spoken, not with words, but she draws now. Little maps, symbols, faces. Sometimes the inside of the stadium, sketched in chilling detail. Sometimes just rows of the infected, standing still, waiting. Every time I see her lift that pencil, I wonder what she remembers, what she's seen, and how many of them are still standing in those hills, listening for the signal to move again. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.